fantasy short stories. Of Monsters and Mushrooms by Lesley Herron. Chapter 3, Best Day Ever. As ruthless wasteland mercs, Brig and Attila had come up against their fair share of spine-tingling encounters. That 40-bandit raid outside New Hope, the shootout at the Red Stand B&B with that no-good varmint Marvin the Mime McKnight, and, despite the jabs and quips, a close call with that rabid razor bear. But all of that, even the unfortunate business with the Remedy sisters, paled in comparison to their harrowing, nay, heart-vomiting 32-minute, 14-second drive through the wastes. Unsure how he had been conned so expertly, Attila had allowed that smooth-talking doctor behind the wheel of his beloved tow truck, and, after screaming for a solid half hour, the moment Miss Priss peeled to a tire-screeching halt, a feat made all the more impressive by the fact they were on a dirt road, the gangly merc leapt from the passenger side door and fell to his knees in the dead grass and jagged gravel. With a thankful wail, he began to kiss the stones like they themselves had saved his very life.
Remind me why...
Brig failed to suppress the body-lurching dry heave, and he clutched at the frame of the vehicle for several moments before he could trust his stomach and balance enough to leave the truck. His boots crunched on the gravel as he turned on his friend.
Why did we agree to that?
Finishing up his lavishing praises to solid ground, Attila narrowed his one eye at his friend as he pried himself back to his feet. Because you're horrible at rock, paper, scissors!
As I recall, you didn't fare none better.
Brig's giant mustache twitched with disbelief.
Best out of 19? Really? And how does paper beat a rock anyway? Makes no dang sense.
Eric's mouth formed a straight line as he exited the vehicle to join the boys. He slung his bag over his shoulder and shoved his hands against his hips.
It wasn't that bad. Not that bad.
Brig pulled the top hat from his head, swiping away the building flop sweat with a meaty hand.
I've stared down the barrel of a gun in the hands of a half-crazed mutant bounty hunter with a spasmodic twitch. I've watched literal gators climb out of the sewers right through an outhouse to snap at my backside. And I came face to face with some ape-eating goo monster.
He used that same hand to gesture in the direction of the deadwoods.
That you say isn't even from this world. None of it, and I mean none of it, scared me as much as your driving.
He slapped the top hat back onto his head.
And that includes working with this guy.
Following the burly man's gaze over to Attila, who currently had a pinky finger knuckle-deep inside his ear, Eric tossed his hands into the air.
All right. I'll admit, it's been a while since I've driven. I may be a bit rusty.
He shrugged his shoulders as he rummaged through an inside pouch in his bag.
Either way, we made it. You still haven't told us, in one piece, I'll add.
Eric gave Brig a pointed look, cutting him off, as he produced a mass of rusted keys on a large ring before approaching a tall chain-link gate.
And we're here to get my brother, Vel. Wait, you didn't say nothing about another person. We already got a 3-way split. Ain't no way we're adding a 4th.
Relax. Eric tried one key, frowned, then moved to the next in line.
You can have my share.
Brig wiggled his mustache in annoyance. A 75-25 split sounded a whole hell of a lot better than their current arrangement, and maybe another body might come in handy, but he had a thing about working with strangers, and they didn't come much stranger than the doctor here. He grumbled to himself and narrowed his gaze at whatever here was. Turns out, he'd seen sand dunes more entertaining than this place. A heavily fortified chain-link fence ran the perimeter of a sizable property, angry wooden slats driven between the gaps. A large arched sign hung above the gate with the name Wasteland Junkin' Stuff emblazoned in crude metal letters. Additional signs had been added on top, as if an afterthought, that said things like, "Keep out! Trespassers will be slapped!" and "Seriously, piss off!" Reading the big sign again, Brig felt a sinking in his gut.
Oh no.
By Newton's first law of thermodynamics! Attila dug his fingers into the open gaps in the chain-link fence as he pressed his face against a small hole, squinting his one eye at the treasures within. Brig let out a long grumble as the doctor, fiddling with the key and giant padlock, opened the gate, and he saw what lay beyond. A run-down 2-story building sat at the back of an acre of bare, dusty land. But that wasn't what had him so peeved. No, sir.
It had to be a junkyard.
Brig, look! Piles upon pristine piles sat in organized rows of chaos that created twisting paths this way and that, inviting potential buyers through a wasteland haven of junk. Did we die in a fiery car crash and go to heaven? Attila's eyes darted from glorious stacks of scrap metal to rich mounds of broken electronics and teetering mountains of automotive wreckage. Awestruck, Attila wiped the line of drool escaping from his lips. Depositing the keys back into the depths of his bag, Eric glanced at the mercs.
"You're gonna want to move that thing inside."
He gestured to Priscilla.
"My brother is always complaining about strippers."
He caught sight of a filthy smile unfurling on Attila's face, and he shook his head.
"And I doubt he's talking about exotic dancers."
When the gangly merc shrugged, let out a squeal of delight, and practically Scrooge McDucked into the nearest scrap pile, Brig began to protest, then paused. He narrowed his eyes at the good doctor, who was gazing hungrily at Priscilla's empty driver's seat, and grumbled. Deciding the vehicle was more vulnerable right now than leaving Attila unsupervised near heavy machinery, he clambered back into the vehicle and maneuvered her inside. As Eric approached the 2-story building, he could see several of the upstairs shutters were in danger of breaking free. He sighed, resolving he would try and fix that if he got a chance. Several new scrap metal sculptures had been added to those that already lined the path, though he couldn't figure these ones out any more than their previous counterparts. He paused at the closest one, tilting his head this way and then that, and deciding that maybe it was a poppy plant. But given how decent of an artist his brother used to be, this sculpture looked nothing like a plant. Not that Eric would ever pluck up the courage to tell him that. As he ascended the front steps, the wood creaked beneath his feet, and the railing rattled in warning. Nearly rusted shut, it took Eric several attempts to wrench open the screen door so he could knock at the metal door beyond. The sound of his knuckles reverberated throughout the rickety house, but when it faded, only silence remained. He knocked again, hoping that perhaps he had simply caught his brother in a manic mode of creation. But when no answering shuffle of movement or responding call of "Go away!" hinted at a life inside, Eric spun on the spot. Scanning the junkyard for any familiar signs of his brother, he grumbled when he only saw the 2 mercs arguing with one another. He caught phrases such as,
"Don't get too excited. Priscilla has limited trunk space."
And "I've never seen anything so organized." Attila gushed over how each pile was lovingly categorized, and Brig gesticulated about not needing any more junk.
"Where are you gonna put it?"
Followed by, "I'll figure it out." Testing the knob, Eric let out a grumble of relief when the door opened with a creak. He stepped inside, reckoning his bodyguards wouldn't notice his absence. Once over the threshold, the interior gave way to dim corridors and dusty surfaces. Eric flipped a light switch, without any effect, and continued down the long hallway. He ran a finger across the table that butted up against the stairwell and sneezed at the cloud of soot that plumed into the air. The walls were bare, the paper peeled in places, and the carpet had begun to pull away from the baseboards. He stopped in the living room and stared down at the large, lumpy couch, a new addition, and likely a rescue from the side of the road, judging by the cat-shredded armrests and faint animal odor. The TV sat dark, the antenna attached to the top twisted in all directions, home to an artistic spider and its beautifully woven web. Eric shuddered and whipped around, turning his back to that room and hoping to find something less bug-infested. Too many legs. No, thank you. He flipped on the light switch in the kitchen, which, wonders never ceased, it worked, then grumbled. The trash can overflowed with empty microwave dinners, a burnt saucepan, the contents inside still somehow smoking, and empty glass bottles. Enough bottles that they littered every surface in the cramped space. They filled the counters, the table, the cupboards, and Eric was certain he had seen the glint of several in the oven.
Whoa, someone's got a problem.
Eric jumped 3 feet into the air, collapsing back against the table, and toppled over a liquor store's worth of bottles to the floor. Some rolled away, while others shattered, sending shards skidding across the linoleum. He clutched at his chest, whirling on the dapper merc who had snuck up on him. "What the hell, man?"
Sorry, I guess I'm just naturally sneaky, like a mongoose.
Disregarding his manners, or the fact that mongooses weren't known for being sneaky, Briggs stepped into the cramped kitchen and began snooping around.
Looks like this brother of yours ain't here.
He's around somewhere. He doesn't tend to leave. He has people issues. Eric let out a long breath, regaining control of his hammering heart. But if we're gonna go hunting for monsters, we're gonna need his help.
I don't think anyone's been here in a while.
Brig dragged his finger across the windowsill, through an inch of dust, then gestured to the array of potted plants, all of them dead, verging on mummified. An amused chuckle bubbled out of Eric as he shifted, staring at the withered specimens.
Nah, those always look like that.
Vel has a black thumb. He turned back to the hallway. I'm going to check and see if he's upstairs. Brig grunted in response, then opened the fridge to see what goodies he could find. Silence hung throughout the house like an ever-present ghost, muffling Eric's steps as he climbed the rickety stairs, careful to avoid the broken ones. He stepped out onto the second landing, home to several rooms, an office, and a single dimly lit bathroom. He knocked on the one door he knew to be his brother's bedroom, but, again, heard no answer. He peered inside with a grumble. This room was just as cluttered with empty bottles as the downstairs. Blankets and sheets sat in a wadded-up bundle in the middle of the bed. The closet held only a handful of clothes, and the mirror above the dresser was shattered. A smear of blood painted the jagged edges, and several drops led away into the bathroom. But hints of who Vel used to be shone bright through the hopelessness. A book on the nightstand, titled Tales of the Dragon Keeper. Loose pages covered in doodles and sketches of interesting plants or familiar faces from home. More potted twigs on the windowsill. But one thing was certain. He's definitely not here. It hadn't been that long since Eric's last visit. Vel said he was just fine. He sighed and ambled back down the stairs, taking in all the recent signs that perhaps his brother had lied to him. Several new holes in the drywall. One of the doors hung off a single twisted hinge, and the hallway mirror had also been cracked. With a frown, Eric began to suspect maybe he should visit more than twice a year. Returning to the kitchen, Briggs' large rear end greeted him. The merc was waist-deep into the bowels of the fridge, and Eric slowed, stepping carefully into the room.
Find anything? Sweet gingivitis!
Brig startled, slamming his back against the interior ceiling of the fridge, rattling the wall and sending a crescendo of bottles smashing into the linoleum. He winced, reclaiming his top hat as he extracted himself from the unit and swiveled on the spot.
Why you gotta sneak up on a man like that?
I'm a goose, or whatever. Eric grinned. Find anything?
Nah.
Brig plopped his top hat back on his bald head and reached over to shut the fridge.
I think I ate something edible.
He placed that same hand on his stomach and let out a small burp.
But now I'm doubting it.
Really? Eric frowned. What about alcohol?
Nope, not a drop.
Of course there's not. Eric raked a hand through his hair. Well, at least now I know where he's gotten off to. He sighed, kicking past a pile of bottles to head for the front door.
Wait up!
Brig followed at a brisk walk, the other man's long legs carrying him faster and further until a rumbling that violently shook the house caused them both to freeze. The quaking stopped, and Eric glanced wide-eyed at the large man staring back at him. What was that? A worried expression crossed Brig's face.
Attila.
The building rattled again, and the pair bolted outside, stepping into the blinding light to behold...
Is that a DeForester 5000?
Attila paused his hauling over another tarp of stolen goodies to wave up towards a 12-foot-tall bipedal death machine, one arm ending in a spinning saw of death and the other sporting a grabby hand. It sure is! He slapped the thing on one of its giant legs. Someone attempted to retrofit this bad boy with legs instead of treads, and I figured all it needed was a new power core. Then I tuned up the torque ratio of the central drive and installed an updated AI chip. He grinned. When it's all done, I must show it off to the baker's dozen. Or what's left of them, anyway. Eric, frozen by the tornado path of destruction that remained of Vel's junkyard, raised a finger in weak protest. I don't think my brother would appreciate you stealing his stuff. Stealing? Moi? Attila managed to put on a look of mock outrage. I would never. This is just borrowing with style. A familiar wash of frustration mingled with rage, and Brig puffed out his chest, flexed his muscles, and twitched his mustache.
Attila, what'd I tell you? Priscilla ain't got room.
Fear not, my chiseled Chadwick. I have a plan. The one-eyed merc produced a small remote and pressed a button with a flourish. Trashbot, show our fine friends here what I made for you.
Crashbot protocol. Loot order initiated.
The machine's voice rumbled as it turned 180 at the waist, then stomped off around the back of the lot. Oh no, Vel is gonna kill me. Eric could hear metal creaking and carefully stacked what's-its crumbling in the distance.
Trashbot Prime, roll out.
The giant bot came back into view, hauling an 8-wheel flatbed behind it, piled high with stolen treasures. I still think this counts as Just wait until I get the rocket launchers installed!
Attila, no!
Brig held up his hands.
Do you have any idea how much those rockets would fetch down at Charlie's discount ammo bin and pawn? I ain't trading a month worth of vittles so you can blow yourself up again.
Fearing how little of the junkyard would remain if they stayed, Eric ignored the arguing pair and quickly marched his way between the tarps and piles of junk to stop near the large manhole cover at the center of the lot. He turned to the others, waving them over. Can you guys give me a hand? Oh, I'll do it! Attila, escaping the argument before he could lose, vaulted and flipped his way through the organized chaos to land perfectly next to the doctor. He stared down at a rusty patina green manhole cover with a hastily welded handle attached to it with the words, "Don't even think about it," carved across its surface. You're probably going to want Brig to do that. Eric grimaced, taking in the very noticeable lack of muscles on the gangly merc. Attila waved him off, spitting into the palms of his gloved hands and hunched over, wrapping his fingers around the handle. The big guy has weak elbows. And, using all of his might, Attila heaved. And heaved. And heaved. Neither of them could be sure where the groaning was coming from. His mouth, his spine, or the hinges on the manhole cover. But after several grueling minutes, the hatch clanged open, and they were assaulted by the musty smell of damp tunnels. Brig took a step back.
Is that a sewer?
Yes and no. Eric adjusted the bag on his shoulder. It used to be, but now it's a pipeline to Guttertown. The big man bit against his lip, fighting off the body-trembling shiver that threatened to knock him off his feet.
What if there's gators down there?
That's just a legend. With a shrug, Eric offered the pair a cheeky grin and jumped down into the darkened hole.
Nope.
Brig stepped back.
No way.
Another step.
Not happening.
2 more steps.
I ain't wrestling no gator. Not after last time.
Attila tried to suppress his grin, having been the one to hide that massive reptile in the outhouse to begin with. But he reached out, grabbed hold of the giant merc by a suspender, and hauled him back. Remember, buddy, if we help this guy, he'll bring in the biggest payday of our life. He patted the man on his giant peck. No more bounties, no more monster hunting, just flapjacks and bacon as far as the eye can see. The soothing thought of never having to deal with another barroom brawl, or shootout, or failed raid, especially ones that landed them on the wrong side of the Remedy sisters, was enough to overcome Brig's fear of the deep, dark places of the earth.
All right.
He surrendered with a flailed gesture.
I'll go. But if I see even one hint of a gator, I'm out.
Relax. Slapping the man on his shoulder, Attila grinned. I doubt we'll see any gators. We're too far west. He turned to the sewer entrance. Lizard folk, on the other hand. Oh, hey, Trashbot. Patrol protocols until we get back. Protect Miss Priss.
Acknowledged.
The machine gave a creaky salute with its grabby hand. Brig, sputtering, reached out to stop the gangly merc.
What do you mean, lizard folk?
When Attila pinched shut his nose and jumped into the hole like cannonballing into a pool. He disappeared without a sound, leaving Brig to rethink his life choices. While the sewer had been smelly, dank, and thankfully gator-free, neither of the 2 mercs had expected to find a dingy subway platform at the end of the heavily modified tunnel. But as they clambered out of the sewer pipeline, Attila and Brig stared, wide-eyed, at several benches, cracked tile columns, PSA posters, complete with graffiti, and a set of train tracks at the platform drop-off.
My ginger's left tit.
Brig removed his top hat reverently, looking up and down the endless tunnel.
I knew it! The government's secret underground network does exist!
What? No! Eric shook his head and chuckled at the ridiculous idea. It's just a normal secret underground network. He held up a finger, cutting off any response, as he flipped over his wrist on the other hand to check the time on his watch. 3, 2... He had barely opened his mouth when the rumbling of a massive, dilapidated bullet train drowned out his words. Wind whipped at his hair and clothes as he smiled at the expression on the big man's face. The screaming of brakes overtook the rumbling, forcing them all to clamp hands over their ears. As the train shuddered to a stop, a gentle tone broke out over crackling speakers, followed by a voice.
Ding dong! Station 519, your destination has been reached. If you're joining us all the way to Guttertown, please remain seated. For those embarking, please mind the gap. Bing bong.
The doors on the giant silver beast rattled open, inviting them all inside, and Eric took the lead. He stepped off the platform and found a bench seat near the back where all three of them could sit. The pair of mercs were slower to follow, peering timidly inside, before hustling all the way in as the doors began to screech closed around them. A moment later, the gentle tone returned, informing them of their departure, and, with all the speed of a greased-up tortoise on a slip-and-slide, they shot into motion. The G-forces sent the mighty mercenaries top hat over Teakettle, and they slid along the rough steel floor until they came to a stop at the back of the car, right next to Eric, who grinned down at them. The train rattled and clanked, bucking against its own speed on the narrow track. Brig wrapped his fingers around the nearest railing, hauling himself upright as his eyes took in the other passengers. Several of them were human-shaped and colored. But that was where the similarities ended, as many of the other passengers were, different didn't do them justice. A brilliant feathered birdman sat at the far corner in business slacks with a briefcase, reading the day's news. A woman, carved from pure stone, stood in the middle of the car, grasping the ring above her head with one hand, while the other held a cassette player attached to the headphones on her ears. Three suidai, pig-like creatures, in overalls, cast wary looks at the hairy, four-armed wolf creature snoring loudly in his seat. Brig had seen his fair share of off-worlders, but they were rare, and most of them could pass as human, or at least close enough that nobody thought too much about it. Trolls and those green-skinned weirdos out near the speedway. Heck, the doctor there had funky, long ears. Attila had even, for a brief afternoon, dated a gal with 3 door knockers. But this gaggle of strangers were as varied as they came, and, under normal circumstances, he would have been far more curious about their origins. Instead, his eyes were locked onto several figures sitting just beyond the 3 suidai.
Attila, tell me those aren't reptilians I see.
The end of the harrowing train ride couldn't come fast enough for Eric. Between Attila realizing he had severe claustrophobia and Brig freaking out over the lizard folk, the 10-minute trip felt as though it had lasted hours. But eventually, the ancient brake slammed into place, launching the 3 of them from their chair as the train came to a bone-removing halt. They followed the procession of exiting patrons, Brig doing his darndest to avoid catching the gaze of those scaly imposters, when that pleasant voice and tone rang out over the platform.
Bing bong. Welcome to Gutter Town, finest underground establishment in all the realms. Settled in 1862 by our benevolent founder, this city is the golden jewel of the wastes. Enjoy your stay.
Then, in a quick, hurried afterthought, added,
Departure tickets can be purchased at the kiosk to your left. No return trips without a valid ticket. Bing bong.
Did we have tickets to ride the thing here?
Brig's mustache twitched, failing to recall a salesperson or window anywhere on platform 519. He clutched his top hat tight to his head, worried the reptilians may have already altered his memories. Nope. Eric's wide-eyed wonder for the train had lessened over the years, and he waved a hand towards the booth in question. A sign hung over the single grime-encrusted window, stating it closed for lunch.
Getting into the city is free, because once you're here, you'll spend money.
He stepped in line with the moving throng, inviting the mercs to join him.
But they don't want you to leave, so the tickets, when they have them, sell for a ridiculous amount of money, or they just don't sell them at all.
He nodded his head at the window.
As far as I can tell, they've been on lunch for the last 5 years.
As they walked, Attila couldn't help but dart ahead as they neared the end of the tunnel. He'd never been to an underground city before. Maybe it would be a glittering, glistening cavern of glowing stones and crystals, with giant pillars of white marble holding up an impossibly high vaulted ceiling. Instead, ew. Disappointment settled into his belly as the grungiest, filthiest, seediest metropolis he had ever laid eyes on sprawled out beneath them. And that included the Panwork Mines forced labor camp he and Brigg had been sentenced to back in 2008. Nestled in the heart of a massive cavern sat a network of apartments, businesses, and derelict buildings of dubious construction. Glowing electric lights hung from poles and awnings, creating glistening spiderwebs of buzzing illumination. Large machines could be seen in the far distance near the back of the cavern, slowly chewing away at the rock to help expand the ever-growing city, and a thick haze of pollution tinted the air yellow, exhaust stacks from several buildings spewing out more gunk that added to the unique stench of industrialized armpit. In the very center of town, the other buildings spiraling out and away from it, stood a massive skyscraper. Large beams had been erected around its perimeter, supporting the giant building and preventing its imminent collapse. It reached all the way up to the, admittedly impossibly high and poorly painted to resemble the outside sky, ceiling. In fact, judging by the boarded-up hole around it, a mixture of plywood and bricks, the monolithic structure had fallen through the earth from up above to where it now rested. A testament to poor engineering and what happens when officials are bribed to ignore any sort of geotechnical survey before building a skyscraper over a giant cavern. This place is... Attila, still following the others from the train platform, stepped through an opening in the aluminum-paneled wall and grimaced as his boot touched down into a smelly mud pit. Gross.
Yeah, well, when your city is run by a kingpin...
A burly, wolf-faced man grunted, snorting a puff of rancid breath at the gangly Merc.
Cleanliness goes down the drain.
The one-eyed Merc perked up at that. A kingpin, huh? I always thought I'd make a good kingpin. Cutting off that line of thought, Briggs smacked his friend on the back of the head, rebooting his errant thought process. Eric reached out, hauling back on the pair of them as he moved off to the side, out of the path of traffic.
Look, we gotta keep a low profile here.
He offered the Wolfman a wide, fake smile until it lumbered away.
Because once we find Vel, we're gonna have to sneak our way back topside.
He narrowed his eyes at the pair.
And we can't do that if you're judging people by where they live or threatening to leap off a moving train.
I wasn't judging them. Attila adjusted his hat, rubbing a finger under his nose to remove the stench from his nostrils. It's just that you'd think an underground city would be cooler.
What did you expect?
Eric gave him a serious look.
This city is home to all the races that don't fit in upside. It used to be a trading hub back before the portals closed. A place where monsters could trade their wares to the government without the populace ever knowing. After the collapse happened, they were stuck down here with no access to resources.
Once the three of them had stepped through the fence, the empty, narrow path from the platform gave way to bustling streets filled with vendors, neon lights, and the tinny whir of thousands of small, two-wheeled vehicles. Voices cried out over the din, hawking their goods or complaining about prices, and the smell of cooked food and spices was almost strong enough to cover the stench of the populace.
Wait, back up.
Briggs stroked his mustache with one hand.
You're telling me that the government hid this entire city down here, along with the portal, and ferried goods back and forth underground while keeping it hidden from the general populace?
He nodded thoughtfully, then yelled,
How is that not a secret underground government network?
Well, Eric shrugged.
Not anymore. The government collapsed back during the war. That's what they want you to think.
The more important question, Attila gave his partner a warning look, threatening him to calm down as scrutinizing gazes turned their way.
How are we supposed to find your brother in this place?
Blurting out a sheepish laugh, Eric raked his hand through his hair again. Well, given that the house had been drained of alcohol, I'd start looking in a bar.
A bar? In this place?
Attila looked to his left. Flickering neon signs denoted at least 20 taverns, saloons, pubs, tap rooms, even a cocktail lounge. Brig did the same with the right side of the street to see another 15 similar drinking establishments.
Any idea which one?
Huh. Eric smiled with a confidence he didn't remotely feel. I guess we're just gonna have to check them all. 35 taverns. And this was just the first street. Attila rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, straightened his poncho, adjusted the floppiness of his hat, and cleared his throat.
This is the best day ever!
Thank you for listening to Of Monsters and Mushrooms, the rewrite of Book 1 by Lesley Herron. Join us as we post new chapters roughly every other week. If you would like to listen to the entire book or her other novels in the series, you can do so at talltaletv.com/series or by using the link in the description.
Attila, tell me those aren't reptilians I see.
Could you imagine? That would be... Holy cannoli, they are!
If this is another one of your pranks...
No, they really are giant lizards! Guys, stop being rude.
That ain't no lizard folk. Look, no dorsal crest. Quick, do you see a superciliary ridge?
A what?
Superciliary ridge! A bony protrusion over the eye socket!
Seriously, stop. They're starting to look this way.
No, I don't think so. Sweet summer sausage. That rules out draconians and saurians. That only leaves... Attila, we gotta go!
Hey!
Now!
What? How? We're on a moving train!
Them's are Anunnaki! Chain splicing, memory wiping aliens after your soul energy!
What?
I'm out of here, with or without you.
Brig, no! That door is sealed for a reason!
What are you doing?
Dude, you're going to crash the train!
Wow. We're really moving, ain't we? That wall is a lot closer than I realized. On second thought, maybe they are just lizard folk.
Is this a bad time to realize I'm claustrophobic?